What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Surfing the Stream, where every week we're on a quest to find out what is the greatest movie of all time. So it is finally time to review Rebel Moon Part 2, the director's cut, Curse of Forgiveness. That is such a long title to say. So, admittedly, I never watched the PG-13 version of this movie prior to watching the director's cut. So I can't really give comparisons on this version versus that version. As a whole, part 2 is not nearly as good of a film as part 1. It pains me to say that because the first third of this movie and the last third of this movie are really good and on par with anything that is in part 1. The whole let's watch them harvest this grain idea is one of the worst things that Zack Snyder has ever done in any of his movies. Not only does this not really add anything to the overall film, but Jesus Christ, it is a struggle to get through. I'm telling you, I fell asleep, I think twice. I mentioned in my review of part 1 that I thought Zack Snyder was masterful with his use of slow-mo in part 1. And that's saying something come from me because I am a huge critic of his use, or overuse in this case, of slow motion. Every time he used it, it looked cool and it made sense. I didn't mind it whatsoever in part 1. He flips the script here. I feel bamboozled by it to the point where he uses an ungodly amount of slow motion in this movie, and it's for a lot of moments that are just completely useless. Like, it's a dude picking up some grain and then throwing it down. Like, come on. Like, do we really need that in slow motion? But that is just one of the things that just frustrates me so much about watching a Zack Snyder movie. For every amazing or cool thing that he puts into any of his movies, there's one that's equally as bad that he also throws into the mix. And I get it. Slow motion is Zack Snyder's thing, okay? Like, I ought to expect it going into his movies. But the worst part of this movie, the middle third, is where he uses almost a majority of the slow motion, it feels like anyways, and it is just not the right time to use slow motion. If he had used it more in the first third, or maybe even in the last third, by all means, like, the slow motion kind of fits in those parts, but that middle section, there should never have been any slow motion. None. And I feel like the lower additions in this entry are more easily digestible. Now, granted, it leaves a lot of questions unanswered about different things that Zack Snyder has introduced in both of these films. So, like, there's some things in these movies that he'll show, and I'm like, why are they doing that? I'll use the example of, like, the scribes following Admiral Noble around. Like, when he kills a leader of a village, they go in there and take one of the teeth of that leader and they put it on this board with the princess, a picture of the princess, and it's like a collage of people's teeth. Like, why? And he never really gives us a reason why. And that's another big issue with not only just this movie, but both movies in general. It's like, okay, I get it. We don't need to be spoon-fed everything, but can you give us a little breadcrumb here or there as to why you are including some of these things in the movie? Yeah, sure. It looks cool. It looks kind of terrifying. Okay, but it has to have a purpose. It has to make sense somehow. So I just feel like we didn't really get any questions answered in part 2. Now, granted, there's going to be future movies, I'm assuming, with the way it ended. I doubt he's going to answer those questions in those movies, but here we are. I like a lot of the stuff between Gunnar and Cora, specifically in this part, but it makes me wonder why they weren't a core part of part 1. Yeah, they got some scenes in that one, but I don't feel like they did a lot of legwork in terms of developing that relationship until part 2. Now, the final conflict between Cora and Noble was really great. Again, this is the back end of the movie. It definitely gave me like Revenge of the Sith vibes with some of the choreography that was going on. I just had so much fun watching it, and I really wish those Kryptonian swords were used more because the fights with them were just absolutely fantastic. And lastly, I want to mention one thing, and it doesn't really change my opinion one way or another, but I would be remiss not to mention this as a part of this review, and that is in regards to the visuals of part 2. I mentioned in part 1, visuals absolutely fantastic, right? Visually, it's a huge step back in part 2 from part 1. The red color palette is fine and all if you're differentiating the different areas or even like a particular scene, but it's just like everything in the movie's red. And it's just like, okay, can I see something else? So I just feel like the whole movie looks red, and I just wish that Snyder would have gone in a different direction with the color tones here. It's just something to break up the monotony and the visuals from scene to scene. So overall, it doesn't necessarily hurt the movie, but it definitely doesn't help it by any means. And the CGI is just definitely not as good as part one. There were some scenes I'm like, dude, that looks like sci-fi CGI right there, 100%. So overall, I left this one feeling a little disappointed, but I'm curious if I would actually prefer the PG-13 version over this bloated director's cut. I just don't feel like there's enough here story-wise to really justify almost 3 hour long movie. But regardless, I am intrigued with the world that's being built here, and with the future installments on the horizon, I am 100% invested in it to keep watching the series as it releases. But again, I feel like with the way part one ended, and then with this one, I just feel a little disappointed in it. But guys, if you have seen Rebel Moon Part 1 and Part 2, let me know, what is your favorite part? What is your favorite version, the PG-13 or the director's cuts? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, go and hit that like and subscribe button. Really helps us out. But until then, guys, I'll catch y'all next time on another episode. Laters.